I'm undecided as to where to site the trap here in Gamston Wood. Do I go in the more open area just at the back of camera, or do a trap just along here? I don't know, but it's the perfect night for moth trapping. The sky has clouded over. It's not low cloud, but it's high cloud, and it should keep the temperature up, and it is forecasted not to go below double figures this evening, so a good few hours it should be on the cards. I have an eye out for one particular species, no matter where I decide to site the trap. Well, we're up and running at 20:15, the same time as I started trapping last night at Miss and Carr's. A very different kind of feel of a night tonight. But I dare say we'll have to wait a little bit before the moths start to come in. But I think we're going to get a good species list tonight. I'm feeling quite excited about this. But there again, whenever you start up the trap, or you're even setting up the equipment, there should always be an air of excitement as to what you're going to catch. Maybe that hoped for rarity as the bulb starts to brighten, and it's now a cup of tea time. I mentioned at the start of this video about one particular species that I would be hoping will turn up tonight. I think there's a good chance, despite the fact that this moth's hardly been recorded in Nottinghamshire in the last few years. It really started to be recorded in the county from about 2004, and it was pretty much annual, although only in very, very small numbers, and it was a real rarity right up until about 2015 or so. Then there's been a number of blank years where this moth has failed to turn up. It did turn up last year in Neil Pinder's Keyworth Garden trap, and it's already turned up this year at Colic. The moth in question is lead coloured drab, and it's a species that Dennis and I trapped once or maybe twice at Bevercoats Pit Wood a number of years ago, and I haven't seen it since. If it's anywhere in Nottinghamshire and breeding, then this is one of the likely sites, because the larval food plant is here in quite some abundance, and that's aspens and poplars. Hence the reason why I'm sat here underneath a number of aspens. I'm hoping it turns up. I would love to see it again and to see if it is indeed breeding in Nottinghamshire. So that's one to look out for. That's only a hoped for species, it's not a guarantee, but I'm sure we may get a few other interesting moths that we haven't seen for quite a while. It's the perfect night for it, and I've got the perfect cup of tea, considering it's from a flask. Well, here's a nice little thing. This is a leased black arches. It's quite a common moth of deciduous woodland. It used to be a graded species in Nottinghamshire at one time, if I remember right, grade 3 listed, but I think it's probably increased, and it's certainly more widespread than what we used to think it was. But a lovely little moth. Despite its small size, it's actually a macro moth. If you've caught a light brown apple moth and you're new to mothing, then this is about the same size as a light brown apple moth, and it is one of our larger moths, but it's a beautiful little thing. Often can be found resting on the trunks of trees by day, and it has a habit of always facing downwards when found at rest. But a nice one to get. It will occur in suburban gardens, so one to look out for if you've not trapped the species yet. Well, the sky's darkened considerably now. I'm almost an hour of this trapping session has gone. Two moths have just come in recently. The first was a lovely little moth that I always like to trap, and it's Chinese character. It's a species that we'll see again in its second brood later in the year, but it's a beautiful little moth with a lovely resting posture. And after that came in engrailed. Engrailed was quite worn, and it's a moth that I don't really catch that much anymore. We used to get a lot of in Sherwood Forest at one time, but as I don't trap in Sherwood Forest very often nowadays, I don't see it, certainly not in the numbers that I used to. Maybe it's in something of a decline at the moment, I don't know. Before that, just two moths, single common quaker, which came out of some bramble just at the side of the trap, and a Hebrew character. But something else has just dropped in, and it's one of the quakers by the looks of it. Well, I showed you one of these the other week on some trapping session, but it wasn't as well marked or as contrastingly marked as this particular individual, and to be honest, I wish I'd taken it home and photographed it. But this is a waved umber, a really beautiful moth, cryptically marked, fabulous bit of camouflage here, and a really nice moth. It's quite common as well, so you've got every chance of catching this from an urban garden if you trap from there and aren't able to get out to deciduous woodland like this. I've had this regularly in my trap at home. So lovely moth, waved umber, one of my favourites. It's an unusual shape, and to be honest, this time of year it's the only moth that you're going to catch of this shape, at least in Nottinghamshire. There's a quite nice moth. This is a red chestnut. Can look very similar to some clouded drabs red chestnuts, and they're usually a little bit flighty as well. This one's took a while to settle down, long enough for me to take it out of the pot and to film it for you. But a moth that many people will trap on a nightly basis. I've had this at home, but not very often, maybe only one record, to be honest. So there's one to look out for amongst the various orthosias and clouded drabs in your trap. But say, it's fairly common and widespread, but a moth that I've never caught in any kind of numbers, maybe just singles or ones and twos. So that's red chestnut which is coming. Well, since 9:15 the moth activity has increased. I'm on to 18 species, and there are moths coming in at a steady rate. Could well get easily topside of 20 species this evening. There's some of the orthosias which haven't turned up yet. And we're at that sort of transitional period of mothing now this time of year. This is probably where, if you're trapping from home, it's worth trapping in your garden. You're going to get a few more species now than what you would have got a month or so ago. And although your species list may start to increase, the number of moths might not. You tend to, despite getting a greater variety and greater number of species, there's often lesser numbers. But keep at it, because those numbers will grow and the number of species you get will grow. I like to try and emphasise moth trapping at home for people, especially people who are thinking about moth trapping, because that's where, in all likelihood, you're going to start. Now, here's a nice moth which has just come in, and evidence that new species are coming on the wing. This is a small phoenix. Don't often settle down like this, so I'm quite pleased to have the opportunity to show you this moth. Beautiful moth. It's beautifully marked. It's not particularly colourful, but just look at those markings. It's an absolute cracker, and it's one of 3 species which have come in. The other 2 I'll put photos in the event that I don't get any footage, and one is a yellow barred brindle, and that's a beautiful little geometry too, and despite having yellow in the name, it tends to be more green than it ever is yellow in my eyes. So that's 2. The third one is a pine beauty, and it really is an absolute beauty too. Hopefully I can get some footage of that, and I'll talk about that in a minute or two. Well, here's that Pine Beauty. Really is an absolute cracking moth. I'll put a couple of photos in because there's generally two sort of colour forms to this moth, and this is the paler one of the two. It's a strange conglomerate of colours, to be honest, but the other form is much more reddish generally than this one. Either way, it's a really nice moth. Fabulous. The head and thorax are strikingly coloured. An absolute beauty, and a beauty which frequents pine woods or mixed woodland such as this. It's very much a species which will eventually turn up even in the most urban of gardens. So that's Pine Beauty. Well, here's a fabulous moth which had sneaked in without me noticing, and this is a streamer. Probably the easiest moth to identify really this time of year. There's nothing like it at all. It's a super geometry, and the background coloration to those wings, when fresh as this specimen is, has a hint of sort of purplish about them. But with the darker markings making attractive patterns across the forewings, this really is an absolute beautiful moth. It's a nice one to get too. Never been a moth that I've caught with any regularity or in any numbers, so one to look out for. It's a real cracker. Well, so far it's been a really good night. Not had my hoped for lead coloured drab. There's still time yet, but might not be here. It's funny sometimes moths can move up through the country and turn up in Nottinghamshire, and for a number of years they do really well, and then they tend to disappear. I'm wondering that about chocolate tip, which is another moth that did that a few years ago. I haven't seen one for a while. Has anybody else in Nottinghamshire, or have they dropped off? But we're on to, well, we could reach 30 species. Satellite hasn't come in yet, but there's a few species which aren't around in good numbers, and I think that's largely down to the weather. I think they're more or less done and dusted, and that applies to the quakers. In terms of totals of quakers, 2 common quakers, 3 Hebrew characters, there's a single small quaker, a twin spotted quaker that's come in, and a second twin spotted quaker that I've had this year, and 1 clouded drab has just thudded onto the sheet. It could be that quakers are around in small numbers now, and I think that's what's happened. With the fine weather, it's great for them to fly. I know the temperature's been quite cool, or indeed very cool, but I think these moths still fly no matter what. And so we could be about done with the quakers. So my hoped for lead coloured drab is probably unlikely to appear. But it's still been a great session so far. Say we're on about 26 species. Be nice to get to 30. That would be something that I never expected when I switched the light on this evening. And the temperature is still 12, although it feels a little bit cooler. Maybe I should put a jumper on, do something sensible for once. I'll have to think about that. Isn't that just a fabulous moth? Purple thorn, of course, more contrastingly marked than early thorn, but holds its wings open at about a 45-degree angle at rest, whereas early thorn doesn't. And I know I featured this in the last trapping video from Missing Car, but it really is a cracking moth. We're approaching 11 o'clock, and the question arises, how much longer do I stop? I'll certainly make it to 3 hours. There may well be an interesting little micro that's coming. Not done well for micros tonight. So certainly I'm going to give it till 11:15. The breeze has picked up in this last 10 minutes. You may well be able to hear it blowing through the tops of the trees or even on the microphone now, and see it by the pages being blown in the book. So it might be pack up time in about a quarter of an hour. Well, I mentioned in that last clip about just catching sight of a small micro. I was very surprised to find that that small micro was actually a very small Agonopteryx species. Small Agonopteryx means interesting species in my book, to be honest. And so this little chap will be coming home with me to be photographed and identified. It's certainly something unusual, maybe a species that I haven't seen before, but we shall see in the course of time. Doesn't look great in this pot, but I can't show you it out of the pot because Agonopteryx are swines to get to stand still for a photo for any length of time. So we'll see what this turns out to be, but it's certainly so far the most interesting moth of this evening, and almost the smallest. Well, that breeze is still prevalent now. Didn't expect this, and temperatures dropped a little bit. It certainly feels cooler than the 12 centigrade that the thermometer says it is. So, time to pack up.